Our next interview is with Edwin Glaser, a bookseller from Napa, and probably one of the more important dealers in medicine and science in America. And Ed, tell us a little bit about your background, your family, schools, where you grew up, that kind of thing.
Okay, Mike, like many people in the antiquarian book trade, I came to it from other avocations and professions. I'm a New York boy. I was born and brought up in the Bronx, and I was a journalism major in school. I got a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. Went to work for newspapers for a number of years, most prominently the Providence, Rhode Island Journal-Bulletin. And then through a variety of circumstances, I went to work in a company in which my father was a partner. It was a company that manufactured industrial fasteners, nuts and bolts. And it was only going to be a temporary job, but after the temporary job lasted 13 years, and I was not happy in it. In the meantime, of course, I got married and had children, but I was not happy being the vice president of a manufacturer of industrial fasteners. So I set about to invent for myself a vocation in which I would be able to work alone. There'd be nobody above me, nobody below me. I was tired of bureaucracies. And I thought to myself, what commodity would I like to be involved with? Books. I've always been interested in books. I've always loved books. And I had no idea which end of the book world I wanted to be in. I sent away for some informational material from the ABA, the American Booksellers Association. And in this packet, there happened to be an issue of A.B. Bookman's Weekly, which at that time was the weekly Bible, if you will, of the book trade. And I was absolutely fascinated. A.B. consisted mostly of thousands and thousands of books that were wanted by dealers. And the idea was that other dealers would look at these wants and hopefully they would be able to fulfill these needs, quote the books, etc. I thought this was what a terrific thing. And I soon found myself buying books for 25 cents in the thrift shop and quoting them to somebody in AB for $1. And fortunately, of course, I still had my my day job. But I was increasingly engrossed by this. And it started, you know, from 25-cent books selling for $1. Then I went to $1 selling for $5. And I started to get some sense of the scope of this business. And this was in 1964 that I started doing this. After 5 years of doing this, I found that I was taking 3-hour lunch periods. I was finding all sorts of excuses to go scouting books. I remember fondly taking 3-hour lunch periods going up to the Whitlock Farm Books in Bethany, Connecticut, and looking through that old barn and finding things and quoting them. And with a great deal of encouragement from the woman who was then my wife, I decided to go full-time in 1969. I had 2 children to support and a wife and a house, etc. But I felt I had sufficiently progressed that I could do that. So I took a deep breath, and what a wonderful feeling it was to be liberated and be on my own, to answer to nobody but myself. And in succeeding years, I started out with a small bookshop in what we sort of euphemistically called the East Village, but it was really the Bowery, the Lower East Side, where there was a lot of ferment of cultural activity in those days. It was a small bookshop that I only kept open part-time. But then when I went full-time, I had a rather large second-hand store in New Rochelle, New York, which is where I was living at the time. And I progressed on from just any kind of used book to out-of-print scholarly books in the humanities, and put out catalogs in a number of areas: history, literature, criticism, even music. And it was a good time to be selling scholarly books in the humanities. The libraries had a lot of money. They were just got a lot of money, and there were some brand new libraries, some community colleges and two-year colleges, and in effect, they built libraries and said, fill them up. And we were more than happy to do so. Then, through a variety of circumstances in my life, my marriage broke up, and I found myself having to try to maintain 2 households, 2 children, and an ex-wife, and I was getting tired of an open shop, having people come in and look around and wonder and say, have you read all these books, Mr. Glaser? And decided I wanted to specialize. But my problem was, what am I going to specialize in? I liked all these fields. And that's really when fate intervened. And just through sheer luck, and let me tell you that as a book dealer, you need a few strokes of luck in your career.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. I got a call from an unlikely source. This was the wife of a man that used to sell office furniture to my father's company. And he said, you buy books, don't you? Or she said, actually, it was his wife who was an attorney. She was an attorney for a charity who were given a donation of a 12-room cooperative apartment on 96th Street and Central Park West in New York.
Ooh. Sounds good.
The owners were both deceased, and they were both Viennese-trained psychiatrists. And they apparently died within months of each other. They had no children, and the entire estate was left to this charity. And the woman who called me, the wife of this furniture salesman, asked me to come in and look at them. And I was pretty much of a newbie at that time, and I was overwhelmed when I went in there. And I knew this was a world-class collection. And the collection was mostly science and medicine, with some emphasis on psychiatry, of course. And I did the best evaluation of it I could, raised as much money as I could, made her an offer, and she accepted out of hand. As far as they were concerned, the books were a nuisance. They wanted to get the books out of there because the principal asset was the apartment.
Of course.
So I was able to do that for her, and I soon realized that I had gotten a bonanza.
Yeah.
One of my memories of that is that there was one whole room of literature and translation, which I was not terribly interested in. But I mentioned it to a librarian friend of mine who said, yes, I'll take it. And he brought a truck up from Maryland, where the library was, and took this entire room of books, which I had no interest in, and I recovered the cost of the library to myself, and I still had the books I wanted.
Sounds good.
Now, ironically, of all the areas that I was prepared to specialize in, medicine and science was the least likely. My education had been mostly in the humanities. My interest was in the humanities. But these 2 deceased collectors, in their Teutonic thoroughness, had all, or a great many, of the bibliographies and references I would need to work with these books. And they also kept in most of the books the original invoice, who they had bought it from, what they had paid, original descriptions, so I got a flying head start. And I sort of pulled down the shades and locked the door and closeted myself with these books for a few months, took a deep breath, and issued a catalog in a specialty which months before I knew next to nothing. And the material was good enough so that the catalog was well received. And when you do that in the book world, you start getting a reputation. I found that people started coming to me for that sort of book, and people started offering me that kind of book. So the specialty was thus imposed upon me. The next step in my career, I suppose, was through personal circumstances. I moved from New Rochelle, New York, to Sausalito, California. I was 50 years old. My children were now, didn't need me to drive them to Little League anymore. They were both starting college. And I really loved California. The trade in California was so welcoming. Several of the prominent names took me out to dinner and made me feel a part of the book community there. And there you are. It's now, that was 1979. It's now almost, how many years later? Almost 30 years later.
30 years.
And which makes me a native Californian. 30
I
years
guess
in
so.
California, and you're a native.
I guess you're a native. When you first started out into the trade, who were some of the people that were sort of mentors or influences on you?
Right. An important mentor for me was a woman named Helen Hirsch, who was the widow of the man who ran a company called the Fordham Book Company. And they were first-rate scholarly booksellers. And she was a big help. Her son, Daniel, by the way, has also went on to a successful career in books. And she was very, very helpful. And I must say, I feel a great attachment to many people at that point in my career who were helpful. Everybody was so giving. A man named Oscar Barron of Alley Cat Books in Yonkers told me what to buy, told me what not to buy. And instead of people feeling that there was a new competitor coming their way, they welcomed me. And I have always, that sort of collegiality has always been a great appeal to me about working in the book world. Very important.
Ed, the book business has changed dramatically in the last several years because of the internet. What is your feeling about it? Was it easy for you to transform, to become an internet bookseller in the sense of having a computer and doing your stuff? Was it difficult? How did you see this as a help or a harm? What was your experience at the outset?
I always said I wanted to be one of these, did not want to be one of these old guys that said, things were better in the old days. Well, it's changed. You know, I call it a revolution.
Yeah.
I lecture every August at the Antiquarian Book Seminar in Colorado, and I tell those people that it has indeed been a revolution. There are some upsides to it and some downsides to it. I must say I've been pulled into it kicking and screaming, but it's the way it is, and it's the world that you have to deal with. The upside and downside is the greater transparency in the trade. We used to feel that we could assess a book's rarity on the basis of how many copies we personally had seen or heard of in our careers. And now we go online and see that 30 copies are being offered, and it's not quite such a rare book. But the surprises go the other way, too. Books that I thought might be common or relatively common, there are no other copies or very few copies. So it's the way it is. There's no doubt that it's different. Maybe I'm getting rather curmudgeonly, but I really, really have to say, even for the record here, that if I had to start all over again today, I'm not sure I would.
You're getting one step ahead of me right now. I was going to ask you, the next question I was going to ask you is, if you were entering the book trade today, how would you do it, or would you do it?
Yeah.
So
the great joy to me was scouting, the opportunity to travel all over the place, go into people's bookshops, see the various ways that they operated, and through the knowledge I had built up in my specialty, look through their stock, find something that probably I might have a customer for, but in an open shop they would never have the customer. Find that book, get it to the institution or to the person who really wanted it, and that joy of discovery, and that I was able to use my own informed intuition as to what to buy. To me, that was the great joy. Now, you've got to think twice before you make that decision. But I still do it. I still operate by the seat of my pants.
I do too.
And, I've survived.
But get back to the question. If you were entering the book trade today,
Yeah.
would you? And how would you do it?
Oh, I suppose I would.
Of
I may
course
be
you
a
would.
little commercial, but I suppose I would. And how would I do it? I would not want to isolate myself as strictly an internet bookseller.
Yeah.
I think you have to figure out a way to separate yourself from all the anonymous people out there. And I must say, I really must state that a downside of the internet revolution is that there are an awful lot of people online who haven't the slightest idea what they're doing. And I just wonder and hope that the general public can distinguish between a reliable, ethical bookseller that knows what he or she is doing. And you see so many ludicrous
It's amazing, isn't it?
descriptions online. But yeah, I would do it, and I can't really give you an answer as to how I would go about
Well,
it.
just
Yeah.
but it would be something that you would continue to do.
Oh, of course.
It's part of your
after all,
bloodstream.
what else?
Yeah. What else? What do you look when you look at the challenges facing the antiquarian book trade in the decades ahead? What do you see as some of the big challenges?
I think one of our big challenges is that we're facing a society and a culture in which the book is continually having a decreasing importance.
Yeah.
Those of us that are in the antiquarian part of the trade are selling not only information that's in the book, but we're selling the book as an artifact, as a historical object from our past. In what other field can people offer something from, say, the 16th century at a relatively reasonable price? You can't buy a piece of furniture.
That's
You
for
can't
sure.
buy a painting.
That's for sure.
You can't buy any sort of object except books. And there are so many 16th and 17th and 18th century books available. And they're a historical record. What was your original question? I lost track of it. Was that it?
That'll do.
Okay.
That'll do.
Yeah.
One of the questions I like to ask is, where do you see the ABAA heading to as an organization? Do you think it's going to continue? Where do you see new booksellers coming from? And do you see a future for an organization such as ours?
The ABAA is more important than it has ever been.
I agree.
Because it's our means of distinguishing ourselves from part-timers. I don't put down part-timers. A lot of very good part-timers.
Absolutely.
I mean people that really are just having the slightest idea what they're doing. I think to anybody that wants to be a serious bookseller has to belong to an organization that stands for ethical
the ethical standards.
ethical standards, right, that any book may be returned, that we stand by what we say.
Our product, yes.
We've been vetted by our peers. Supposedly we know what we're saying, what we're talking about, and I see it as more important than it ever has been.
Talk a little bit about the Colorado Book Seminar, which is something both of us have been involved in, and that we both feel very strongly about. Just give us a little bit of an overview of your affiliation with that.
In 1979, I was at a Toronto, Canada book fair, and Jake Chernovsky, who was the editor and publisher of A.B. Bookman's Weekly, which I mentioned earlier, said that he was getting together with the head of the library school at University of Denver, and they were thinking about putting on a seminar that would bring together librarians and book dealers, with the idea being that book dealers knew really very little about the problems of librarians and vice versa. And would I like to participate? And I said, sure. And that was in 1979, and we're now going into 2008. It'll be our, 30th?
30th year.
Yeah. And it has been, we've put several thousand people, certainly more than 2,000 people through that thing, many of whom are now respected professional booksellers. And I know you and I have talked about this, and it's one of the great satisfactions we've had too. We feel that we're able to pay back some of the knowledge and kindness that was shown to us when we were new. And I think it's an increasingly important element in maintaining professional standards in the book world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There are two kinds of booksellers I'd like to ask you about. One is the so-called great booksellers of our era, the movers and shakers, as it were. And who do you see them to be? And also, part two, who do you see as the young rising stars or young people in the trade? Not that there are that many, but there are people who are going to be, in a few years, the icons.
I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to use that question as an opportunity to say that one of the joys of the book business is that you have the opportunity to invent yourself. There are so many ways to do it, and the right way to do it is what's right with you, what you're comfortable with. There are dealers that go around knocking on librarians' doors and seeing, and others that sort of hole themselves up in their office, never see the light of day. There are people that do catalogs. There are people that have open shops. There are people that do book fairs. And it's all a question of your temperament and what you're most comfortable doing. You know, sure, there have been a few people that have made a lot of money in the book world, but I would say the vast majority of us make a comfortable living, enables us to live a very nice life, doing something we love with a commodity we respect. We can travel, we meet people of like-minded people, and there are a few people who I must say, as I say, I'm not going to name names, but their ambition and their energy just blows me away. What it takes to maintain the sort of operations they have.
Just as we close off, Ed, tell me a little bit about your remembrances of some big purchase you made, other than the one that got you started.
Yeah.
And say something a little bit about your biggest disappointment.
Yeah.
Sometimes they come right up, but sometimes you have to think about them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I knew you were going to ask that question about the biggest disappointment, and the hell of it is, if with longevity, they work themselves out.
Yeah.
You know, I sold a book this morning that I've had for 10 years. I hadn't looked at it for 9.5 years. So, you know, with patience, with longevity, with a little creativity, ultimately you can undo your mistakes. There have been several, as I think I said earlier, you can't really exist without making some good buys, not necessarily lucky buys, but good buys.
You need to have them.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about how people do in their business. What percentage of your business, just off the top of your head, comes from mail order, comes from book fairs, or comes from other sources?
Yeah. Well, that's changing. That obviously is changing. Over the past few years, it has evolved mostly because of the way I'm conducting my business to mostly mail order and internet. My catalogs produce my greatest revenue. The occasional book fair, I used to do about 4 or 5 book fairs a year, now I just do one. That's a nice little infusion of cash when you usually need it. And the internet, it's a sprinkling. Things keep, it's very nice. We used to run to our mailbox. As mail order book deals, we used to run to our mailbox to see what was in the mail. Now we go online and see what orders we've gotten. You know, I'm on the ABAA database. I'm on ABE and A-Libris. I have my own website. So orders come from various sources. And things that I thought I would never sell that way. And occasionally, an important book, a big book.
We'll sell on that basis?
We'll sell on that basis, yeah.
Which matching service do you get the best results on?
I would say ABE. Yeah.
Is that far and away the leading one for you, or?
Yes, but every time I think I'm comfortable about saying that, I'll get a surprisingly large order. I don't get the volume of orders on ABAAI Lab that I do. from Abe, but you know, it seems to me that I get fewer but more substantial orders from ABAA and my own website.
And you're not planning to retire real soon either, are you?
What am I going to do? What am I going to do?
What's a bookseller? Always a bookseller.
I work out 5 days a week in the morning, and after the workout, sit around and have coffee with a bunch of old guys like myself. And they start talking, well, what am I going to do today? Well, I think I'll go home and take a nap. I think, gee, there must be something I can do in the yard, pull up the weeds. I wish I had something to do today. Well, my wife will make me take her shopping. And they ask me, what are you going to do? I said, well, I've got a catalog I've got to get out. I've got to prepare for a book fair. And they look at me, and I really, there's envy in their eyes.
Yeah.
So, sure, I'm not going to do it on the same scale that I did it 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but I hope to continue doing it on some scale, you know, until they pull me away.
Kicking and screaming.
Kicking and screaming.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Appreciate it.
Mike,
Great
it's been
interview.
a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you very much.